What's going on, guys, and welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk to you about using for loops in Python. Now, for loop is a special type of loop in Python which allows us to loop over different collections of items. So a lot of times we will use loops in Python to loop through different arrays, or we can loop through letters instead of a string, or we just loop through a series of numbers. For loops provide a very specific purpose, and the easiest way to kind of wrap your head around why for loops are useful is for me to show you guys a bunch of different examples. We're going to look at why for loops are awesome. So without any further ado, let's get started. Down here in my Python file, I'm going to write out a couple different for loops. So the easiest way to create a for loop is by saying the keyword for. And what I'm going to do is specify a variable, and this variable is going to essentially represent a different value every time we go through this for loop, and you guys will see how that works in just a sec. But just know that this variable is going to be used for every iteration for our for loop, and each time it will most likely be a different value. So in our case, I'm just going to call it letter. I'm going to say for letter in. Now what I want to do is specify a collection that I would like to loop over. For example, this could be a string. So I could put a string like Brilliant Rogers, and I can put a colon. And basically what this is going to say is for every letter inside Brilliant Rogers, we're going to do something. And down here inside of this for loop, and again, we're going to indent it. So let me show you guys basically what this is going to do. So I'm going to print out this letter variable, and actually going to print out a different letter inside of this Brilliant Rogers string at every single iteration of this loop. So I'm going to run this program, and down here inside of my console, you'll see that it's printing out Brilliant Rogers, and on the first iteration of the loop, we printed out the first letter in Brilliant Rogers, which is B. On the second iteration of the loop, we printed out R, and on the third iteration, we printed out I, and fourth was L, and so on and so on. I'm essentially just looping through all the letters inside of Brilliant Rogers. So I'm saying for each letter inside Brilliant Rogers, I want to print out that letter. This is kind of how for loops can be used. We can define a variable, and that variable will change each iteration of the loop. So on the first iteration of the loop, this letter variable represented a B. On the second iteration of the loop, the letter variable represented an R, etc, etc. So we went through this entire string and we're able to print out each letter. In addition to using strings, we can also use other collections. For example, an array. So up here, I'm going to create a variable and I'm going to call it cars, and I'm going to set it equal to a bunch of different values. We can put in a list of car companies in here. We can have BMW, VW, and Audi. And instead of saying letters, let's say car. And I could say for car in cars. Now I'll print out the car. So over here, I'm saying for each car inside of this cars array, I want to print out the car. So now we're able to print out each element inside of that array. So down here, you'll see that we're printing out BMW on the first iteration. On the second iteration, we're printing out VW, and on the third iteration, we're printing out Audi. So I'm able to loop through all the values inside of this array. You can name this variable whatever you want. I could call this name, and if I wanted to access it, I have to access it using the same name. So we can loop through something like an array. We can also just loop through a series of numbers. So I could say index over here, and again, this could be anything. I'm just going to call it index. So we could say for index in range, and in here I can pass in a number. So I could pass in a number like 10, for example, and down here I'm going to print out the index. Now when I run the program, you guys will see that it will print out every number in the range from 0 to 10, not including 10. So starting with 0, it's going to print out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, but notice that it didn't print out 10. So essentially it's printing out all the numbers between 0 and 10, not including 10. You can also specify a range of numbers. So I could say, for example, 3 and 10, and this will print out the numbers between 3 and 10, not including 10. So when I run the program, you'll see that we're printing out 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, not including 10. So whatever value you put inside of the second position is not going to get included in the range. So ranges can be really useful. So I could use a range loop through an array just like we did before. I want to get the length of this array. In other words, if I want to figure out how many elements were inside of it, I could just type out len, and inside of this parentheses the name of the array. And this is going to spit out 3 because there are 3 elements inside of here, right? So what I can do inside of this range function is I can type out len and then cars. And what is this going to do? It's going to essentially give me the range between 0 and the number of cars inside of this list down here. So I will actually type out cars index, and this will allow me to access each individual car inside of this list, just like we did before. But now I'm going to do it with the range. So you can see I'm typing out BMW, VW, and Audi. So for each iteration through this loop, it's basically going to print out cars 0, cars 1, and cars 2. Because in here we're passing in a 3. And remember, whatever I pass in here is going to range from 0 all the way to that number, not including that number. Another way we could print out elements in an array and looping through something like an array is actually a very common use case for loops. But like I said, we can use for loops to loop through essentially any collection. So I could loop through a string, I could also loop through something like an array. And I also want to show you guys one more example while we're here. Why don't you go ahead and print out a range up to 5, right? And this is just going to be a simple program. You can use all sorts of logic inside of these programs. So let's say I wanted to do something special on this first iteration of the for loop. So say I could say, if index is equal to 0, print first iteration, and then otherwise we could print out not first. This would be an example of maybe like you want to do something on the first iteration of the loop and do something else on subsequent iterations. And when I run this, you'll see that on the first iteration is printing this out, and otherwise it's printing out other stuff. So don't be afraid to put complex logic inside of these for loops, because they can really make your programs more powerful. And that's really the basics of using for loops. And that's it for this one. If you enjoyed or found this video helpful in any way, shape or form, then consider leaving a like and subscribing. Turn on post notifications to be the first to know when I upload a new video. Also, if you have any suggestions or any questions or anything, comment them down below. And until next time, thanks for watching. Peace.